Welcome to the Adventures of Alice and Bob, the podcast where we get root access to people shaping the world of cybersecurity today to find out a little bit about their journey, the events that have helped shape their career, and those things that maybe still keep them up at night. Today's guest, Rob Black, has had a front row seat to the evolution of the cybersecurity industry, starting his career in the mid-90s, and while at RSA witnessing one of the most consequential security incidents of the past 2 decades. In recent years, Rob has shifted from building security products to building security programs as founder and CEO of Fractional CISO, a firm that helps mid-sized companies build and run real-time cybersecurity programs. Not just checkbox compliance, but actual real risk reduction. He's the inventor of 3 security patents and is known in some circles as the IoT guy from a previous role he's held. As a product leader, he's helped develop major security platforms, and Rob is a man of conviction. He spent much of the past decade fighting the battle against a compliance culture that sells the illusion of security whilst actually putting companies at real risk. So Rob, thank you for joining us today.
James, that was like the best intro ever. I got to send that to my mom.
There we go. Well, I'm sure she'd be very proud of you because it's quite the career you've had. So, in fact, let's talk a little bit about your mom. Where did it all begin? As did you actually? I'm sure as a child you weren't sat there thinking, "I want to be a fractional CISO." So, where did your interest in tech begin?
Right, sure. Well, so don't know when the interest began, but I can tell you one of the seminal moments of my life was I was 10 years old and my parents bought an Apple IIc. And I can remember as a 10-year-old lying on the floor because we didn't have it on a desk yet and playing with that computer and using it all the time and thinking it was the most amazing thing. Back then, don't know what it did. It wasn't connected to anything. It had tiny memory. I would write little programs, make like little horse racing games or other games. We certainly could play games on there, but it was amazing. Kind of opened my mind up to possibilities of computers and set me off on the path that I'm here today.
And from those early days with the fond memories of sitting on the floor with the Apple II, did you then follow like a traditional path into electrical engineering or computer science? How did you start to shift in this direction?
Yeah, so that's a good question. When I was in middle school, I can remember having a conversation with my dad. What should I do? And he's like, "You should get an electrical engineering degree and become a security sales engineer." He's like, "Those guys make a lot of money. They're selling technology products." Da da da. Da. And what did I know? I kind of went down that road. I went to Washington University in St. Louis and got a couple of engineering degrees. I originally started with computer science and electrical engineering, but ended up switching to system science and engineering, which is an applied math and kind of and computer science, so a dual degree. And that kind of really was more aligned with my background, which is I just love math. So yes, I love computers, but I just love math, and applied math was super cool. And I thought I was going to do all sorts of applied math things, and I've done a little bit of that, but career kind of went a little bit of a different way. Then when I got out of school, took a number of technology roles, IT, then developing products. And then, and I don't know if I'm supposed to keep going, but I'm going to. Then I wanted to switch gears to more on the business side and got an MBA, and then switched more to the product side. So not building the products, but kind of specifying what we're building and doing a technical product management roles. And that felt like a really good fit for me because while I love technology and love building products, I really love kind of shaping the market and finding good customer fits.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really interesting one. We haven't had many people who've come through the kind of product management track on this podcast, but I think it's kind of where I got my first break in the security industry. Was there was a product manager who wanted to kind of hire a security engineer to work with him and do things. And I just think it's a really interesting intersection because you're there talking to customers who have real world problems they want to solve today, but then you're also building products, trying to work out, okay, where's the technology going? Where's the landscape going? And you've got to get ahead. If you just listen to what the customer says that they want today, your product's going to stagnate. So, how did you approach that challenge? How did you find that fit in the product management world?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm pretty good at is I talk to lots and lots of people. So, I would talk to like every customer that I could. I would talk to tons of prospects. I just love, I'd love going to shows, trade shows, and just talking to people and understanding where their pain was and, what were the things that they were expecting. And then, of course, looking at other products, not necessarily just competing products, but other products and like what were they doing in the marketplace. And that really helped to shape, I think, good product management practices, which is, building something that people actually want, not just because the technology is cool.
Yeah, and how did you come to become known as the IoT security guy for a while?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that it was kind of a self moniker, but, so we'll take a little bit of a jump. So after grad school, got a couple roles, but I ended up at RSA Security, and so was there for a number of years, and then I switched to an IoT company, and so I was doing IoT and security for them, and, it was kind of a empty space at the time, and, you know, I self-monokerized as the IoT security guy. Now, of course, people don't care about IoT security, so it's somewhat irrelevant. And so what that all these devices all over the place are compromised? No one doesn't seem to bother anyone.
Yes, well, you get the old Twitter feeds like the Internet of Shit or whatever. There's all these kind of things out there just throwing a lot of shade on IoT devices. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I
it's,
mean, from my perspective, there's a reason that none of the IoT devices in my home get compromised because I don't have them.
absolutely. And you mentioned there that actually, some of the things you really got stuck into is a vendor people will know very strongly in the security area, which is RSA. How did you find yourself coming to work for RSA? What was your kind of initial role there?
Yep. So, so again, I was in the product management space and I went to RSA. And, I think one of the nice parts about RSA at that time was they just wanted to hire smart, capable people and were less focused on the security domain. I mean, they had so many security experts there that, mattered a lot less. But what I found is like everyone there was really a security expert. It was really remarkable. And not that this is the end all be all, but like, there'd be tons of marketing and finance people with CISSPs. It was just like a very technical environment, even for the non-product, non-engineering people. So when I was there, I learned a tremendous amount about security, not just the products we're building, but the stuff that we're seeing going on in the industry. Um, it gave me some great opportunities. Again, I was a product guy, but I ended up inventing several patents. It was just the kind of environment where, they were, maybe less focused on your roles, but you're on your role, but more focused on what could you do to make things happen. And if you look at a number of CEOs and senior leaders around the industry, so many of them were junior or mid-career people in the early 2000s at RSA. So they had a tremendous eye for talent. And now if you like look around and just see how many people have been super successful there, it's pretty impressive. And it was interesting because I was at RSA conference last week and I met with a bunch of people that I used to work with, and many of them are quite successful, and it's really cool.
Yeah, no, it's always nice to see that when, there's so many people we talk to on this where there've been kind of those distinct incubators in the industry, and especially in that kind of that period when you were there where there was kind of the big tech boom and companies were more willing to take risks and just employ people just to think about things and explore places versus now it's kind of swinging very much the other way where everyone's talking about how can we replace people with AI and have less people. It's an interesting shift over the years.
For sure.
And what was there a particular product line you were associated with when you were creating these patents and that had that initial role?
Yep. So I was working on SecurID the whole time, really. So that's our identity and access management product. Now things have evolved since then, but at the time, it's hard to remember. But like 2007 to so I was there 2007 to 2012. But RSA SecurID was the thing. So today, when you use your multi-factor authentication, there's a million options. You can use your Google Authenticator. You can, there's you have the Microsoft version, right? You have the tons of vendors have MFA tool, but at the time, RSA was the only company with the patent for time-based one-time password. So you would have many people with like rings of RSA tokens, many IT people with rings of RSA tokens, physical devices that sat on your key ring to do multi-factor authentication. So, IT managers or, folks who worked at banks or, different government roles. It was really impressive the how big a footprint we had for identity and access management. Now, since then, obviously the patent expired and things have shifted quite a bit. But at the time, it was really a center point for identity and access management, and especially around one-time passwords, which multi-factor authentication was important then, just as it is now. And so, therefore, we had the IT product.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anyone on this, listening to this podcast of a certain age can probably, like I probably can, go into my house, pull open a drawer and find at least 2 or 3 RSA key rings. They had these little kind of calculator displays for the younger listeners, displaying these, generated numbers that you now see just in the app, in the Authenticator app. But anyone who was anyone with any level of seniority in any large company had at least one of these around for the multi-factor authentication. They were such a critical thing. And that must have been like, that must have been quite exciting to be at the time, because like you said, they had the patent, they were on the forefront. This was the advanced way to secure accounts, privileged accounts of the time.
Yeah, it was exciting. I think from my perspective, I wish we had had more market impact post that. I mean, we had a bunch of great ideas and, but it feels like we got distracted. Why isn't RSA the dominant identity and access management solution today? Why are the Oktas of the world, or, one logins or whatnot? Why couldn't that have been RSA? And, probably could have been, but, there needed to be a big shift. And I think that's very difficult for a big organization that's making tons of money in one area. How do you leverage that to make tons of money in another area when you're gonna have to spend a bunch of the money you're making? So, little bit of a bittersweet memory. At the time it was amazing, but, what if, RSA was the dominant thing still today? That would have been pretty cool.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It wasn't without its troubles as well at the time, because people will probably well remember the RSA breach. So
Oh, I haven't heard about that. Tell me.
yeah, I think that might have just fallen within your time and caused you a little bit. You might have even had hair back then. I don't know, but talk to us a little bit. In fact, would you mind setting the scene actually? Because again, there's probably people out there who've joined the industry recently who maybe aren't intimately familiar with what happened with RSA. So maybe you can set the scene there, given that the SecurID was such importance to the industry.
Yeah. So again, remember, SecurID, very important for all these banks, for all these government solutions, for really any large enterprise or many large enterprises. And RSA announced in March 2011 that there'd been a compromise, and the compromise clearly was pretty severe. So it came out later as, congressional hearings, whatnot, that it was the Chinese government that had done the attack. At the time, that wasn't, a for sure thing, right? But, this, and it was very unclear for the customer base, like, are they targeting me? Is this a financial attack? Is this, for government services attack? That sort of thing. So it was, if you think about it now, I don't know if there's an analogy. I mean, maybe like if Google Workspace were compromised, or Microsoft 365 would be an analogy of something that's at the center point of so many things. But, or maybe Salesforce, I don't know. It's just, think of some big application, but also gives you the keys to the kingdom to a number of different parts. So, this was quite a significant thing for the industry and for RSA and for me personally. A little after the announcement, we were working, I would say, kind of nonstop. And, funny personal aside, I was in the office. It was like 11 p.m. on a Friday. So it was that was not my norm, by the way. I was normally probably enjoying time at home or going to sleep. But at 11 p.m., I got a call from my wife, and she said, "Hey, Rob, it's time." And so she was 9 months pregnant with our first child, and, she was ready to deliver. So that kind of, put a crimp in my remediation activities, and headed out home, picked her up, went to the hospital, had a baby, And very exciting time personally, but pretty challenging time work wise. Um, the you know the the nature of the attack was that it was clearly bad guys. We said it was a sophisticated attack. I mean, just like any attack, was it that sophisticated? Could we have done better? Probably, but at the time, you also have to remember 2011. Probably less obvious than it is now. I don't know of a security tool that was attacked like that before that point in time, right? So it wasn't. No one gave us the advance warnings.
I mean, I'm truly impressed you survived the professional exfiltration going on at RSA and the exfiltration in your personal life as your wife was giving birth, and you managed to juggle those two things at the same time. I mean, that must have been a very stressful period for all concerned there.
Yeah, look back at it is interesting. The funny part to me is the burn for me was actually over the subsequent. So I was at RSA for another 9 months, and the burn was really the months and months later, because we would meet with customer after customer talking about what we're doing. Product wise, we were hardening all of our products. So instead of the roadmap that we had, we were really focused on product security, which by the way was a good thing, but certainly probably set us back somewhat. We really thought about like all of the elements of what could we be doing differently. And so it was a great learning experience, but boy, that was that I think burned quite a few people out, including me. And was kind of happy to switch gears by the early following year.
Yeah, and I think it was an interesting example of kind of what we've come to see as the norm in those kind of high-profile supply chain attacks, right? We've seen recent ones targeting Salesforce plugins and integrations and things like that, but we sort of saw RSA. We later saw kind of SolarWinds. These big, and they're often the same threat actors going through this, looking to leverage that position. So I'm just curious to from your perspective as a security practitioner, as a CISO, what lessons you learned in those early days as to how the threat landscape was shifting and where the effort should be focused.
Yeah, I think in terms of the threat landscape, I mean, I think it's all the same. The I think my takeaways probably were a little bit different than from the threat landscape part. It was more from the from the fundamentals part. We were not doing clearly all the fundamental. I mean, now it's obvious, like these are the things you should be doing. Part of that's learning from, our mistakes from 15 years ago, right? So, but the, but some of the other bits are like, should you be using one tool, like, where are your dependencies on that one security tool? If you're using SolarWinds, if you're using RSA SecurID, and like the reality is, and I don't want to, so let's just say any identity and access management tool, like if you're using that tool, like how amazing are they at doing all the things? Because they're a commercial entity. So, everything is downstream of trust from an identity standpoint. And, should you be using some oddball identity tool? Maybe not. It probably hasn't been pressure tested, right? But you're probably not going to get hit like that. And then the same thing with managed service providers. Like, this is different than a managed service provider, but if you have a managed service provider that's servicing 1,000 companies, boy, is that an attractive target. And now you're downstream, they have administrative access to your systems. And, and that one's pretty rough. The second bit is we were less prepared than we should have been for that type of incident. We should have been tabletopping on that type of thing, nation state attacker going for, root access essentially on our, on our product line. And what would that mean? What would we do? How do we cut it off? Are there ways to segment our customer base so it's less likely that they're going to be cross-contaminated? So a lot of lessons learned. On the threat environment stuff. I mean, it's the same threat. I mean, China's still a threat actor. Maybe they're more subtle now. Maybe the easy targets of these big security products is harder to hit, and maybe our controls are better. So it's not going to happen the exact same way, but you can still fear them. I mean, from my perspective, a commercial entity protecting against a state actor is going to be quite difficult. I think you can raise the bar so that they have to spend a lot of resources on the attack, but if they're determined to get you, that is going to be pretty difficult. Now, if you want to, let's assume that state actors have like the low level people someone's like, hey, go see what you can find. You can raise the bar so they're not going to get you. But if they're determined to attack you, how realistic is it that you're going to prevent that type of attack?
Yeah, I'm interested actually in the lessons learned from the industry as well, because obviously at the time it was the premier multi-factor, it was the only really multi-factor authentication option out there. Lots of companies learned a very hard lesson about the limits of any single security control when it comes to identity. Yet, fast forward 2025, 2026, where we are now, and we see, yeah, great, you've got Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, push notifications, all these different things, even FIDO2, these sort of unphishable or phishing resistant forms of thing. But companies are still just relying on those to gate the kind of keys to the kingdom accounts and identities a lot of the time, and don't actually seem to be learning the lesson. How do you think now about, taking a more layered approach, defense in depth, however you want to phrase it, least privilege, all these different things come into play? And what are the lessons you took away there?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the least privilege for your identity system, I think that's quite difficult because sure, you can say, okay, there's these three people that are administrators and no one else could administer it. But the reality is if they get, some sort of, just imagine you scan your app with your Google Authenticator and you have your multi-factor bit there, if they're on your phone, they're going to be able to get it. Now, sure, that doesn't scale across the industry. If there's some sort of vulnerability and they can compromise that Google Authenticator app or whichever app at scale, that's a problem. If they can attack, using an example, LastPass, right? So basically, we got to store our password somewhere. We're going to store it in the cloud, and there's a key, there's a per person key, but now whoever the attacker was for that one, they downloaded all of them and they can put servers running against each of those and trying millions and millions of keys for all of your encrypted blobs, right? So from that, like in that example, the threat model for LastPass or any of its competitors, I mean, does it make sense to have a local password manager? Then of course there's cost there. What happens when you lose your machine, right? But I mean, I think the exercise of thinking through those types of attacks is quite interesting. I think the practicality of doing something at scale is quite difficult. And maybe someone tomorrow is going to have the distributed bit where the thing is stored locally, and then we're going to only on one server store a maximum of 5,000 blobs, and so an attacker could only get to 5,000 at a time. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's that kind of thing that people often think about the initial authentication, but then fail to think about what that identity is authorized to do, what standing privilege it has, and actually what's behind that. So when the adversary in the middle kind of attack comes along, that single control that I think people have just got very... It's one of the topics that you talk about a lot, right? This kind of this compliance theater, and people say, for my cyber insurance, whatever it is, I've got to do MFA, so I've rolled out MFA. Now I don't need to worry about anything else identity security related because I have MFA. And then it turns out that's SMS push notifications, and yeah,
SMS push notification for one set of systems and not all the systems and not all your administrative stuff. And yeah, I mean, totally agree. I mean, in terms of the compliance data bit, there's actually two things you said though: compliance data and the insurance bit. The insurance companies actually have a mechanism. Of course, it's a horrible one for making sure that it's done. It's when you make a claim, they're going to validate that you're actually using multi-factor as promised for all your things, and if you're not, they're not going to pay you. For going back to the permissions bit, least privilege is obviously super important. But there's always creep. Every time we do an internal audit for any entity, ourselves included, there's always someone that has more permissions than they should have because they needed it that one day to do that one thing. Someone forgot to turn them back, right? Or that contractor didn't quite leave, but like all of a sudden they had less and less time, and then they kind of left. And then, well, should I turn them off for all the systems? I don't know.
yeah.
So,
Oh boy, nobody ever raises a ticket saying, I have too many privileges, I have access to too many
Right.
systems.
No, for sure.
Take it away and you can bet they'll raise a ticket, right? It is the ongoing challenge in IT. I love this kind of compliance theatre thing. I know this is something that's been a big bugbear of yours because, we saw SOC 2 come out and people were like, hey, SOC 2, you can get it in 2 weeks, no problem. That was red rag to the bull for you.
Yeah. So, and that's the SOC 2 in 2 weeks thing has actually come in two waves. So probably 5 years ago, a bunch of the compliance tools that are now more, I would say, established, they had that messaging. And I found it pretty sickening because, SOC 2 is a validation of your cybersecurity program. In theory, 150 controls. A bunch of things are like you are following good change control process. Well, you can't establish that in 2 weeks. It's like, okay, I give this person administrative access. I create a ticket. It's approved by someone, or, I'm going to make these configuration changes to the firewall. So there's some sort of review board like, yeah, let's do that. Right. Or it's auto approved. Cool. But you have a process around change control. So, things like that, I find it pretty maddening that, that someone would claim that that's the case. And then there's like all the other bits. I'm doing great vendor management. Oh, you're going to get control of all your vendors in 2 weeks. You have 200 vendors. I mean, come on. Oh, I have good risk management. You're doing a risk review, like the CEO's seen it and like signed off on that in 2 weeks. It's like, they do all these checkbox activities, and then say, and here are our policies that no one's read and we're not following. Here's our incident response plan that has no details about our company, no contact information for our cyber insurance company, no no process, like we're going to open up a Slack channel or we're going to do this, whatever the thing is, right? And you have all this approved program that is really doing very little. And sure, can I put in a bunch of fake documents that I'm not following and and say, yes, I've done all these things? Yes. But I mean, obviously there's zero value there. So 5 years ago-ish, we had a number of these companies that were pushing the SOC 2 in 2 weeks. And I want to say that one of my claim to fames is, I don't know if this is true, but that I stopped that by embarrassing them. And so I have a presence on LinkedIn, and I would post about it, and I make videos about it. And we published a white paper, and I think it embarrassed them. That maybe in some other activities, I won't take sole credit, but that messaging really stopped. And so, thankfully that stopped. It was very damaging to say SOC 2 in 2 weeks because obviously you're not building it's one thing. Okay, you have a good cybersecurity program in place already. Okay, cool. Now let's do some validation and get a SOC 2. Sure. But that's not what they were claiming. Now, fast forward to today, and that messaging is out again. There's a lot of race to the bottom tools that are pushing for SOC 2, and it's damaging the industry, right? So basically, people are saying SOC 2 is not valuable. It's in fact not valuable when you get a faux audit by a faux auditor. One of the vendors is allegedly did some very inappropriate things where they, pushed fake auditors onto their customers and, maybe falsified some data. Again, this is allegedly. But, the consequence has been, auditors that were not CPA firms were, validating, doing the audit. You have these reports that are identical between customers, essentially, and you had non-security programs happening. Now, so Dell, that's the company that's allegedly done it. Their behavior seems that they're acting like they're guilty, whether or not they are guilty, and it's been very damaging to them, but also kind of highlighting, how many of their competitors are doing similar, maybe not exactly the same things with the faux auditors or, no validation or, publishing documents that don't represent what they're really doing.
I guess the challenge is that there is potentially market demand for this. There's an incentive for them to do the wrong thing, I
There's
guess.
market demand for fake audits. Yeah, I agree. I think the market demand is some sort of validation for vendors to show that they've crossed a certain bar. And so in the US, we've kind of said it was SOC 2. And then what happened is, let's say 5 years ago was a more rigorous process, and it's come down and down and down for some segment of auditors. Now, there's some auditors out there right now who are stellar. And if they published a report and you read the report, you'd say, wow, clearly they did their homework. A lot of good things in this report, good validation of the things. And you can feel confident. But there's a large number of them, these auditors you've never heard of, auditors that are, pushing paper, and I guess in some cases maybe faux auditors. Now, the problem is multifold, so you can blame the compliance tools. I will instead blame largely on the AICPA, which is the governing body for the SOC 2, and say they have not taken this seriously enough. I hear rumblings that they are going to, but I think they need to address it head on, and it's almost a crisis. Now, it's not a crisis for the AICPA until folks switch from SOC 2 to, ABC auditing or whatever the new thing is. To me, I think the secret is leveraging peer review. And I know with the AICPA, they're using other CPAs to audit the auditors. From my perspective, I would love to see folks with cybersecurity certifications put their certification on the line and say, hey, I'm a CISSP. Hey, I'm a CISM. I object to this report. Enough people object, the report's invalidated or someone checks into it. And then, and if you are doing something bad, your CISSP or your credential is on the line. It feels like something like that would be way better for the industry, where where I or anyone could make a judgment at a consequence, right? You can't just, it's not like a poster on social media where there's no consequence when they say they say something nasty. It's like basically I'm putting my professional reputation behind saying this report's should not be valid.
So for the kind of listeners who are thinking, either, oh dear, I've just got a SOC 2 done in 2 weeks,
Yes.
or that they're just starting on this journey,
Yes.
how should they go about finding, someone who can do a quality audit that is actually worth the paper it's printed on?
Yep. So, typically we're going to use what I would call as a mid-tier auditor. I don't want to name them because I don't want to leave someone out, but a mid-tier auditor is someone who's done lots of SOC 2s, who has a strong technical competence, whose name, and this one's a little tougher, whose reputation is kind of known to be, these are quality auditors. And, there's a number of these mid-tier auditors that, yes, it's more expensive than the, whatever the race to the bottom price is, but it's not like you're using a big four auditing firm for your audit. And they're going to do actual validation. When someone sees one of those reports, they're going to have confidence that, hey, they did a good job. Now, knowing exactly who a good auditor is, a little bit tough. The thing you should be asking is, and I'm not saying, by the way, you could do great overseas evaluation. One thing I've observed is like the race to the bottom folks, often the folks are overseas. How much time are you going to spend on the audit? Right? There's a function of, oh wow, this audit's $5,000. That's amazing. Well, how much time do you think they can spend on your audit to do some sort of validation? And then, make sure they're an accredited firm. That's the other bit. Like, with the fake audits, it wasn't even an accredited firm. That one you can check.
And then, clearly this is an area that you're very passionate about as a security leader. I'm curious how you came to be involved and came to found Fractional CISO, how you came to find that sort of niche in the market and what you set out to do with that company and your role.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go back to my time at RSA. So I was at RSA. Again, I switched into the IoT space. So I worked for a company called Exida. We made an IoT platform. Very exciting. Again, another lost opportunity. Could have been the thing, but didn't quite work out. We were acquired by PTC, and then merged with the ThingWorx product line, which they acquired. And so I was at Exida for like a little under 3 years, and then PTC for a little under 3 years. And I ran the security programs for Exida. I ran its security program. For PTC, I ran part of security programs essentially around the IoT products. And I said, boy, every company needs this. And so one day I quit my job, like literally. Okay, Mrs. Black and I planned for like a little under a year, but I quit my job. And I started trying to recruit clients for Fractional CISO. And that was in 2017. And I got 2 small clients by the end of 2017, so that was good. And then 2018, we started taking off, started hiring employees. And then, now here we are, 2026, and, there's 16 of us, and we're helping a bunch of mid-sized companies with cybersecurity leadership. And in terms of how I identified the niche, I was like, every company is going to need this. Like, no, everyone's going to need a security leader. These 100, 200 person companies are not necessarily hiring a full-time person, but boy, are there a lot of things that need to be done for these companies. And, we can help them get ironed out and run their program and, do all the things that they're not necessarily going to do, evaluate their vendors, perform risk assessments on them, help to make sure that they're doing all the things, do internal audits, run tabletop exercises. And, and that's, now we have a nice business helping, a lot of mid-sized companies with cybersecurity leadership.
I mean, I think it's a fantastic niche because effectively every company these days is a technology company, whether they like it or not. And
Yes, you're not kidding. Yeah.
and there's all these mid-market companies, millions of dollars in revenue with goods and services, data to protect, but they can't justify the full-time role or the experience of a full-time security leader on the payroll. I'm curious how you avoid falling into the SOC 2 in 2 weeks trap, where they see hiring a fractional CISO as a kind of, we've got someone who's in charge of security, we can say we've done security now. How do you ensure that actually the engagement with the customer, they actually want to take this seriously?
Yeah, well, I think, okay, so a couple of things. So maybe this might be a funny one, but we charge a premium price, so therefore, we're going to get not the folks that just want the checkbox. We're going to get the folks that actually want to improve their cybersecurity program. And we charge a premium price like Lexus kind of pricing, not like Porsche kind of pricing, right? So basically, it's mild premium to the market, and that helps to kind of, I would say, elevate our clients. So we feel less pressure. A bunch of our clients, probably like, I'm going to say a third, but don't hold me on the number. A third of them come to us with one of these compliance tools, and for the most part, they've tried the compliance tool. They realize the magic compliance genie didn't pop out of the box. Yes, it has, a place to put in all your vendors and put your risk assessment and do all the things, but it doesn't have the genie that's going to do it or make you do it. You're still sitting at the keyboard typing stuff. And so, so a lot of them will use us. Some of them bring their, I would say, subpar auditors to us. And it's our job to act in our best interest of our client. Often there could be a market consequence if they have a subpar auditor. So, maybe we're switching for them, or maybe we're like, hey, this auditor is not amazing. However, here's what we're going to do to make sure your program, is amazing and would pass any audit. And, the audit is a checkbox exercise, but we're going to help raise the bar. Ideally, we'd probably try to switch them, but, switching an auditor is like switching any professional service. It's a pain. You have your plumber or your electrician or whomever that comes over your house, and someone's like, oh, you could switch to someone else. And you're like, yeah, but this guy knows my house and charges a reasonable rate, and I don't want to switch, right? Anytime you have a good professional service, you want to stick with it. And if they have a good relationship and, maybe a multi-year contract, and maybe, it's going to disrupt their audit cycle, they just stick with it. But, sometimes we give them a light push, but, it's our job to act in their interest. And, if they're not seeing it, then sometimes we stick with them.
And how often do you find that, because often organizations will reach out to someone like yourself because they have some worries, they've seen some things happen in the market, some competitors, some regulations come in. But I've often discovered in conversations with those kind of businesses that they're just worrying about the wrong things. Like at the moment in the current landscape, they're panicking about AI and AI attacks, and actually they haven't done the basics right. With other, there's far bigger risks they don't understand, because, cyber events are very difficult for people who aren't in this space often to understand, because they're kind of that low probability but very high impact.
Yes.
What's kind of your starting point for engaging with the customer and setting out what they should be focusing on?
Yeah, so we start with a gap assessment, and we focus on, so we have a standard, a pared down standard of 20 controls that we focus on in the beginning. And it's probably a lot of things that you would expect. Yes, I think AI stuff is concerning, and obviously you could really do something very bad, but also maybe you should turn on multi-factor authentication, and you should have an inventory of all your devices and software and and whatnot, right? And you should make sure that you have some sort of engineering process, and you have an incident response plan that aligns with like what you would actually do, right? So so we will do that, and then as we learn about the company, we're going to help build a program that takes their risks into account. I will say on the AI front, probably even more scary on the AI attack. It's more like, well, what crazy stuff are you doing with AI today with your customer data? And what's Frank over there, putting into some random AI that you don't have a license agreement with, that's your intellectual property or your customer data that you're not getting back?
Yeah, I did a LinkedIn post a little while back, which I think has got the most views of it, one I've ever done, which was about AI is the new Wi-Fi. Users aren't waiting for permission; they're just going
Right.
and installing it, whether you will like them to or not. And that is,
Yeah, I mean, one of our things is you need to give the employees a path for success. So, maybe, you have like a enterprise license, I'm just saying Gemini license, but Claude license, whatever. And then, at least you have some sort of contained risk. Now, of course, you look at the recent, Claude issue. I'm sure, it's contained to a degree, to the degree that the controls that these AI companies have in place, that may or may not be sufficient.
yeah, absolutely. And kind of one last thing for people who are in security or getting into security today, and a lot of our listeners are kind of looking for paths in. One of the challenges is when you're dealing with business leaders who don't understand security, how you actually advocate for it, make sure the security challenges resonate, make sure they understand why this needs budget. What's your advice for helping business leaders who aren't security professionals understand the risk and understand why things need to be prioritized, maybe?
You need to talk the same way the CFO talks to the CEO. So you need to talk in business terms, probability, dollars. If you say we have 100 vulnerabilities and they're all high, the CEO is like, okay, like what, how do I process that? But if you say, you know, we're not patching, and the consequence is there's a 10% chance of a $5 million loss. Remember competitor X the other, last week, who had their thing compromised. It's the same vulnerabilities that we have exposed that are internet facing, and we need to invest in a patch program, and or whatever the thing is. If you talk in business terms, the CEO is going to be like, okay, yeah, no, I get that. Now, it requires a lot more work because you have the data of, oh, there are 100 vulnerabilities that aren't patched, they're internet facing. But like, you can't expect the CEO to understand that I mean, he might understand it's bad, but he's dealing with, HR risk. He's supply chain risk. He's dealing with, currency, exchange risk, right? There's a million things the CEO is concerned with. So like, is it more or less bad than my currency exchange risk? Because you were doing business in this country and our currency is rising or dropping or whatever, right? So, you need to make sure that you're monetizing your answer. Sometimes that's not practical, but if you can directionally give the dollar value, that can be extremely valuable. Pressure test that before you talk to the CEO or senior leadership. Say, this is what I'm going to say. Do I sound like an idiot? There's an 80% chance we're going to lose $1 billion. Probably doesn't have the same credibility, right? You need to really make sure you're like, okay, this asset's worth this dollars. We see this stuff happening in the industry. 10% chance seems very reasonable of this thing happening. Boom, I'm going to say 10% chance of a $10 million loss. And, maybe the CEO pushes back, but say, here are my assumptions. This is why I said that. And he says, oh, I think it's a 5% chance of a $5 million loss. Okay. Well, what do you think? Should we invest or not invest? At least you're having a business discussion instead of a sky is falling. There are a lot of vulnerabilities. They're all high.
No, I think that's a fantastic way to convey it. Like money does literally talk in these situations, and as long as you're being reasonable with the figures, not claiming, like you say, everything is kind of the $1 billion Austin
Right.
Powers move, I think you're in a good place. And like in your role, you're drawing on nearly 3 decades of experience in tech and security. You've touched software engineering,
It
product
makes me
management,
sound old.
IoT. You've got nearly 4 years of experience in cybersecurity. Your career's touched on software engineering, product management, IoT, enterprise security, and now you are apparently the Lexus in the CISO world. If you had to distill it all down, is there a common thread that's run through your career or your journey?
Yeah, so from a common thread, it's really been marriage of business and technology. So, I actually am pretty technical, but I really gravitate to the business side. I see a lot of value in using technology as an enabler for business. I see cybersecurity as an enabler for business. A lot of people think cybersecurity is the department of no. I think just like the brakes on your car aren't allow you to go fast because you can hit the brakes. Cybersecurity is the enabler that's going to allow you to go fast because you can hit the brakes, if something bad happens. But it's our job to make sure the controls are in place, make sure we're reflecting risk properly, and that we're explaining this to the business leaders in our organization what the consequence of the actions are.
And as someone who, like we discussed earlier, has no problem with maybe poking a bit of fun at the industry, maybe calling out some of the kind of misdirection, misclaims that people are out in there around outdated security practices, very overzealous vendor claims. If we could give you the kind of Alice and Bob magic wand and you could change one thing about the industry, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, I think the one thing, I mean, this would really be magical though. The one thing is to have non-cybersecurity people understand the nature of cybersecurity in that it is a extremely low probability but extremely high consequence. I think the problem is, people are thinking like, well, an asteroid is extremely low probability and extremely high consequence. I don't plan against, asteroid hitting me. Um, but the problem is that this extremely low probability is in the 2-3% range, not in the 0.01% range, right? So someone could say, oh, I've gone years, I've never done anything. Cybersecurity, it's never hit us. Our program must be good enough, or you don't know about it, or you've been extremely lucky, and this is the bad year for you. So if people could understand the the probability, it would really change significant behavior. And I think to the benefit of all, because you just think about the times when you're using any sort of tool or vendor and all of a sudden it goes offline or your data is exposed. And it might not be the end of the world, but boy, does it cause an inconvenience for you. And then, the inconvenience could be, you know, going out of business, could be significant, business risk, could be total distraction for years. Um, and, it's a non-trivial problem.
Yeah, I'd like the idea of thinking of it more of like a casino odds than asteroid odds. Like,
Yes, right. Right. And that's, yeah.
Eventually on the roulette wheel, something will come up your way. And it's the same with
Yeah, the roulette wheel is
cybersecurity.
actually a much better analogy than the asteroid, right? Because yeah, it's like a 1 in 36 or something, right? So that makes sense.
Absolutely. And then, when we look at the field in general, there's often a lot of negativity, a lot of doom and gloom, but you're quite an upbeat, positive guy. What gives you optimism about the direction that the field is heading?
Um, you know, AI is going to help both the attackers in the short term and the defenders in the long term. And I think the defenders in the long term, it's going to be quite magical because you cannot really imagine a agent that's acting on your behalf and alerting and fixing and and doing all the things to really prevent and at least alert that something bad is happening. And there's nothing like that exists now. It's tens of thousands of dollars to solve many problems. But in the future it could be some nominal fee, and a bunch of things will be taken care of. Now in the short term, I think AI enables the bad guys to do lots of bad things at scale. So that is going to be a little rough, but long term, it feels like AI could be a big part of the solution and could be a big part of the solution at lower cost. Um, I'm optimistic from that perspective. I do have doomer scenarios in my head that I worry about all the time. It's things like we're fighting, the enemy's fighting us, and turns off all the brakes in all the cars. Or I guess I focus on brakes a lot, but it seems like a pretty important actual life control, right? Or yeah, or the water filtration systems, or or whatever the thing is that they can do at scale that would harm many people. And I don't know that people realize like how connected all of those things are, and how consequential a cyber attack could be. That could be a significant loss of life event.
Yeah, I think like we said at the start, the challenges often with cyber are the risks that are silent until they're not, and then they're suddenly very loud. So I think that's a fantastic point there. We are almost out of time, unfortunately, today. So if people want to find out more about you, what's going on at Fractional CISO, where they can find more information, what are the best places to do that?
I would say LinkedIn, Rob Black on LinkedIn. You may see some funny wig videos where I'm wearing a wig, or I have two characters, one without a wig, it looks kind of like this, and one with a wig that's doing something zany. And those are, I would say, LinkedIn popular. I'll show up at cybersecurity events sometimes, and they'll say, "Hey, Rob, where's the wig?" That's probably the best way to connect. Obviously, you can go to fractionalciso.com. Come check us out. Those are probably the two best places to connect.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for your time today. Unfortunately, that's all we have time today for on the Adventures of Alice and Bob. A big thanks to our guest today, Rob Black, the Lexus of fractional CISOs, whose career has had the common denominator of driving real-world security outcomes, and that curiosity over where security meets the world of business. As always, thanks to our super producer, Jesse, and the team at Beyond Trust who make this podcast happen. I'm James Maud, and this has been Adventures of Alice and Bob.
Thank you for listening to the Adventures of Alice and Bob. Do you have any stories from the cybersecurity trenches that would make our listeners' jaws drop? If so, we would love to have you on the podcast. Maybe you faced down a ransomware attack with nothing but coffee and determination, discovered a breach in the most unexpected way, or had a pen test go horribly wrong. Whatever your tale, funny, harrowing, or just plain wild, we want to feature you on the show. To share your cybersecurity war stories, email us at booking@merchantsmedia.com.